So the next thing I want to talk about is the neurotransmitters within the autonomic nervous system. There are two main neurotransmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline. So noradrenaline is the same as norepinephrine. So this is a motor neuron of the somatic nervous system, and the neurotransmitter in this instance is acetylcholine released at the neuromuscular junction. So what I've drawn here is a representation of the sympathetic nervous system. We've got the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. The neurotransmitter released at the preganglionic neuron in both the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine. So what I've drawn here is a representation of the sympathetic nervous system. We've got the preganglionic neuron in red and the postganglionic neuron in blue. So all preganglionic neurons in both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system release acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter. So almost all postganglionic sympathetic neurons, except those which innervate sweat glands, are noradrenergic. So that is, they secrete noradrenaline to their target organ. So the ones that do innervate sweat glands, they are acetylcholine secreting. So what I've drawn on here is the parasympathetic nervous system. So we've got the preganglionic neuron in red again, and then we've got the postganglionic neuron in blue. So the postganglionic neuron secretes acetylcholine in the parasympathetic nervous system. The final thing to mention is that the adrenal medulla is actually directly innervated by the preganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. So in green I've drawn a preganglionic sympathetic nerve fibre directly innervating the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla then releases adrenaline and noradrenaline directly into the circulation. So in terms of the functions of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, it's useful to think in terms of fight or flight for the sympathetic and rest and digest for the parasympathetic. And these mnemonics are quite broad, but they do give you an idea of the function of these two different divisions. So if you imagine the fight or flight response engaged in a caveman who's running away from the lion. So in response to the fight or flight mode being engaged, you get pupil dilation. So you can imagine that pupil dilation allows more light into the eye, and then that can increase your visual acuity and you can see a nice escape route and run away from that lion. The parasympathetic does the opposite and constricts the pupils. Also, with regard to the eye, the sympathetic nervous system dilates the ciliary muscle, allowing far vision, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system acts on the ciliary muscle to contract it and provide near vision. You also would need to increase your heart rate and increase your heart's contractility to increase your cardiac output to get away from the lion. So the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate and contractility, whereas the parasympathetic decreases both these things. In the lungs, sympathetic activation dilates the bronchioles to allow more oxygen into the body, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system causes constriction of the bronchioles. So in terms of blood vessels, the blood vessels supplying the skin constrict and blood is shunted towards skeletal muscle, so this would allow the caveman to run away from that lion. In addition, the sweat glands in the skin are stimulated, you get increased sweating, so it's preparing for that increase in heat when you're about to run away or fight, and you also get contraction of the pilomotor muscles. Another thing you'll need is those energy substrates in your body to be mobilized. So the glycogen stores in your liver are mobilized, and you get glycogen breakdown and an increase in blood sugar. So the parasympathetic, in terms of its rest and digest function, does the opposite of the things I mentioned. And in terms of the GI tract, it causes the smooth muscle walls of the digestive tract to contract, and it causes the sphincters to relax. You get increased saliva secretion, increased gastric acid secretion, and increased pancreatic secretions. In terms of the bladder, you get detrusor muscle contraction and you get relaxation of the sphincter. And in terms of the male genitalia, the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for ejaculation, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system causes erection. So there's a simple mnemonic for remembering that. Point and shoot. So point, parasympathetic, causes erection, and shoot, sympathetic, causes ejaculation. So that's an easy way of remembering those two functions. So you can see how the fight or flight and rest and digestings can be applied to try and remember those different functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So that's an introduction to the autonomic nervous system.